Welcome to Twilight Tale, where history softens its voice and the past becomes a quiet place to rest. Tonight's journey is called Sleep Through the Work of Ancient Egyptian Scribes. Before the temples wake, before the markets breathe, there is a room lit by a single oil lamp. The flame is small, the shadows are long, and in that circle of light, a reed pen moves, slowly, carefully, like a ritual. It is said that in ancient Egypt, to write was not only to record, but to preserve. A name, a vow, a measure of grain, a prayer meant to last beyond the speaker. Whispers tell us that accuracy itself could feel sacred because a single mark could carry meaning across lifetimes. So settle in. Let your breathing become unhurried. Let your shoulders fall away from the day. You don't have to hold on to every detail. You can simply listen as we drift into the lamplight world of the scribes, those quiet guardians of memory who kept watch while others slept. And if you'd like more sleeping history from Twilight Tale, you can gently tap like, subscribe, and let the next story find you when the night feels long. Now, breathe in, and as you breathe out, step softly into the room. Before the sun remembers how to rise, there is a room that does not belong to morning. It is said that such chambers still exist, tucked behind temple walls and forgotten corridors, where the air keeps its own careful vows. Beneath the silence, stone holds its breath. Dust hangs in the dark like a thin veil of starlight, and every surface seems softened by time, as if the centuries have been passing their palms over it again and again, until even the sharp edges learned to become gentle. In that dim chamber, before dawn, papyrus reeds once rested like sleeping birds. They lay in bundles, pale, dry, and patient, waiting to become something more than plant and river, waiting to be taken into the quiet work of remembering. There is no need for footsteps here. The room has heard enough of them. A small slit in the wall admits the faintest blue. The desert outside is still moon-marked, and the world has not yet begun its ordinary noise. Inside, a shallow niche holds the shape of what used to be: a palette, a bowl, a roll of papyrus tucked like a folded wing. Even in absence, the objects leave an imprint. The chamber knows what it once cradled. Whispers tell us that writing was not merely a craft in ancient Egypt. It was a binding, a tether, a thread drawn between the living and the unseen, between breath and eternity. A mark made in ink could become a door. A name set down could become a shelter. A line of signs could be a bridge over darkness. And so this room, this quiet chamber of tools and dust, becomes an invitation. Imagine the first moment, a reed lifted, dipped, and returned, carrying a drop of night. The ink is dark but not empty. It is a gathered thing, soot and water, earth and fire, mixed until it holds the color of deep river shadows. The scribe's hand does not rush. It floats, almost listening, as if the page itself might speak. The first mark appears. Sound becomes symbol, a breath becomes a sign. Where memory fades, the chamber keeps watching, not with eyes, stone has no eyes, but with the slow attention of things that endure. The air remembers the small movements, the pause between one stroke and the next, the hush that follows a finished line. In this way, the hidden life of the Egyptian scribe begins to reveal itself, not as the life of a worker, but of a guardian, a quiet keeper of order, seated between gods and kings, translating the pulse of the universe into measured lines. It is said that the world to the ancients was never simply there, it had to be maintained. Balance was not automatic, truth was not self-sustaining. The cosmos needed care, like a lamp that must be tended so its flame does not thin and vanish. A scribe tended that flame. In temple courtyards and palace halls, in granaries and tomb shadows, scribes shaped the invisible scaffolding that held a civilization upright. Yet the deepest part of their work was not the counting, or the recording, or the copying. It was the belief that the written sign could hold something sacred, something living. A hieroglyph was not only a picture, it was a presence. A bird was not only a bird, it was a spirit of flight, captured in silence. A ripple of water was not only water, it was the memory of the Nile made still. Each sign carried weight, each stroke belonged not merely to the hand, but to the order of things. When a scribe wrote, he was not simply describing the world, he was helping it remain. Beneath the silence, you can almost feel the fear of error. Not fear like loud thunder, not panic, a softer fear, like the unease of stepping too close to a cliff in fog, because a mistake was not always just a mistake. A sign placed wrong, a line fractured, a name misshaped. These could be felt as small cracks in the vessel of harmony. Whispers tell us that some words were written in red, not to decorate, but to warn. Red like clay, red like dusk, red like the edge of danger. Certain names, certain beings, certain passages were treated as sharp things. Even the ink carried intention, even the color knew its role. And the scribe, moving softly, had to know the difference. He had to know what to keep gentle, he had to know what to leave veiled. In the chamber, imagine the tools laid out as if for a ritual. A wooden palette worn smooth by years of touch. 2 small wells, one for black, one for red. A reed pen trimmed to a fine point. A papyrus sheet waiting, pale as sand before the first footprints. Nothing here is loud. Nothing here is hurried. The work unfolds like a ceremony performed for an audience that cannot be seen. The scribe's posture is often described as humble, cross-legged, head bowed, shoulders quiet. Yet humility is not weakness. In ancient Egypt, the one who held the signs held a kind of power that did not need to announce itself. Pharaohs commanded armies, scribes commanded time. A king's voice could fill a hall, but the scribe's ink could outlast the hall itself. Stone monuments rose like mountains, but even stone could be worn down by wind and salt. Papyrus was fragile, thin as dried river reeds. yet it was trusted with eternity. There is a contradiction here, sacred and strange. The most delicate material was chosen to carry the heaviest truths. Perhaps the ancients understood something we forget in bright modern hours, that permanence is not always about hardness. Sometimes it is about repetition, about being copied, recited, remembered. A papyrus scroll could disappear, but the words on it might survive, carried from hand to hand, like fire passed carefully in the dark. Where memory fades, the scribe worked against fading, not by shouting, by whispering into ink. It is said that the god Thoth, keeper of writing, watched over scribes. Some imagined him as an ibis-headed presence, a moonlit intelligence. Whether or not one believes this, the feeling remains, that writing was watched, that it mattered in the unseen realm. In the chamber, the air feels almost attended, as if the silence is not empty, but listening. When the scribe copied temple hymns, he did not simply replicate sounds, he preserved pathways of praise. When he listed offerings, bread, beer, incense, he was not merely making inventory, he was shaping the rhythm of devotion. When he recorded the rise of the Nile, he was catching a pulse of the world and pinning it gently to a page. And when he wrote for the dead, the chamber grew even quieter, because funerary words were not meant for ordinary ears. They were meant for the soul wandering beyond breath. Spells, hymns, and names, arranged like stepping stones across darkness. A scribe writing such things would do it with care that feels like tenderness. To write a name was to give it a second life. To erase a name was to take that life away. So names were protected, repeated, carved, copied, painted, kept within chambers like this one, where dust fell softly and time moved slow. The scribe understood that a person might die twice, once when the body stopped, and again when the name was no longer spoken, no longer seen. The written sign could prevent that second death. And yet, uncertainty lingered beneath every line. No scribe could return from the underworld to confirm that the words worked exactly as hoped. No one could promise that the gates beyond life would open simply because ink said they should. So perhaps these texts were not maps at all. Perhaps they were offerings. Perhaps they were the most beautiful kind of human thing, a careful attempt to guide someone into the unknown, even without certainty. Beneath the silence, the chamber holds these contradictions the way stone holds heat, servant and keeper, fragility and endurance, certainty written for mysteries that never fully answered back. Outside, the pre-dawn blue deepens. The desert horizon begins to soften. The moon, marked by the last hour of night, lingers like a pale coin above the dunes. Inside, the ink waits. Imagine the scribe pausing, not from tiredness, but from reverence. The reed pen hovers above the papyrus, and for a moment nothing happens. The pause itself feels sacred, like the breath held between words of a prayer. In that pause, you can almost sense the entire world gathered into stillness. Then the reed moves again. A curved line appears, a bird, a wave, a folded cloth, a reed leaf. The signs are quiet, but they are not empty. They are chambers within chambers, small doorways of meaning. Each one is a shape that carries an echo. Echo of river, echo of sky, echo of bone and bread and incense smoke. The scribe's hand knows how to keep the echo gentle, and when the line ends, the scribe does not celebrate, he does not rush, he simply lets the ink dry. He watches the black settle into the fibers of papyrus, becoming part of it, as if the page is drinking night and turning it into memory. There is a kind of peace in this, a peace made of order and repetition, a peace made of careful attention, a peace that does not need to be loud to be strong. Where memory fades, the chamber remains. The tools may be moved, the scrolls may be taken elsewhere. The scribe may rise and leave, his sandals whispering over stone. But the chamber keeps the shape of the work, the way a riverbed keeps the shape of water even when it runs dry. Centuries pass like slow falling dust. Walls crack, paint fades, names are buried under sand, temples are swallowed by quiet. Yet somewhere in the unseen chambers of the world, symbols still linger, not as words shouted into daylight, but as murmurs held in stone, in papyrus, in the soft memory of culture. It is said that some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and perhaps in the hush before sleep, we are ready. Perhaps this is why such stories find us at night, when the mind loosens its grip, when the day's harsh edges soften, when the heart becomes a quiet room like this one. Ink dries, breath slows, the chamber grows darker, then lighter, as dawn finally begins to lift the veil. But the true glow in this place is not the sun. It is the lingering presence of what was written here, lines that once carried the weight of gods and the tenderness of human fear. No clear conclusion arrives, only a soft, sacred uncertainty. Perhaps the chamber was never meant to be found in daylight. Perhaps it lives best in the corner of the mind where dreams gather, where symbols drift like dust in a sunbeam, where ancient hands still move, slowly, carefully, so the world will not forget itself. And even now, beneath the silence, unseen signs may still be listening. Ink made from night and fire. A single lamp breathes in the dark. Its flame is small, no larger than a folded leaf, yet it makes a world out of shadow. The light trembles against stone, and the chamber seems to lean closer, as if listening to the quiet crackle of oil and wick. Beneath the silence, a shallow bowl sits on a low table of sandstone. Inside it, black ink shimmers with a faint, patient sheen. It is said that night can be gathered, not in the sky, not in the wind, but in the smallest vessels, where the world becomes intimate. Here, the ink looks like a piece of midnight captured and held still. Dust drifts through the lamplight, slow as falling pollen, and for a moment the floating grains resemble stars that forgot how to move. The bowl does not speak, it only reflects. A soft crescent of light rests on its surface, moon-marked and pale. If you lean close, if you imagine leaning close, you can almost see your own breath dimly mirrored in that darkness, as if the ink is a quiet water that remembers everything it has touched. This is where our chapter begins, with ink made from night and fire. Not a grand invention, not a loud discovery, just a small, deliberate miracle, repeated in workshops and chambers for centuries. A craft that felt like offering, a substance both ordinary and enchanted. Whispers tell us that to write in ancient Egypt was to cross a threshold, not simply to place marks on papyrus, but to draw a line between worlds. And the first gate in that crossing was not the word, not the sign, not even the reed pen. It was the ink. The ink was a promise. The ink was a bridge. Look around the chamber in your mind's slow lantern light. There is a wooden palette worn smooth by countless fingertips. Two small wells sit side by side, one dark as river shadow, one red as clay after rain. Beside them lie reeds, trimmed and bundled, their pale bodies resting like sleeping birds, waiting for the moment they will be lifted into purpose. Nothing here is hurried. Nothing here is careless. These are tools, yes, but also relics, objects that have learned devotion through repetition. Even the stone table seems softened, as if patience itself has worn it down into gentler angles. It is said that scribes treated their materials as more than instruments. Each element, ink, palette, reed, was prepared with ritual steadiness, as though the very act of mixing and arranging was a form of prayer. And so we drift, slowly, into the making. Somewhere beyond this chamber there is a workshop where pigment is born. Not in bright sunlight, but in cool, quiet rooms where the air holds a haze of soot and mineral dust. Grinding stones wait like old moons, smooth from years of turning. Small jars sit on shelves, clay vessels sealed with wax, their contents protected like secret names. Beneath the silence, you can hear the faint scrape of stone on stone, an ancient sound, low and unadorned. The black pigment begins as soot, gathered from lamps and fires. It is the residue of flame, what remains after light has spoken. Dark powder is coaxed into a finer dust, then mixed with water until it becomes a smooth, living pool. Sometimes a binder is added, a whisper of gum, so the ink will cling to papyrus fibers like memory clings to the heart. What a strange alchemy! Ash becoming meaning, fire becoming language, night becoming a vessel. Whispers tell us that scribes believed this darkness was not merely a color. It carried the fertile silt of the Nile, the black earth that returned each year with floodwaters, renewing fields and feeding gods and children alike. In that sense, the ink was a cousin of the river, dark, generous, and quietly powerful. To write in black was to write with the Nile's shadow. To write in black was to anchor. And then there was red. Red was made from earth, ochre ground from stone, warmed by sun and age. Red was not used for ordinary lines. It was reserved, marked, veiled in meaning. Red could signal danger or sacred emphasis, or the names of forces that were best approached carefully. Some words were not meant to be invited without a boundary. Some signs were sharp, even when written softly. It is said that when red appeared on papyrus, it was like a small ember set among coals, a warning flare in an otherwise steady night. Not dramatic, not loud, just a careful note. Here, pay attention. Here, step gently. Imagine a papyrus sheet laid out on stone. On its pale surface, a bold black hieroglyph sits like a calm shadow. Next to it, a small red mark glows like a protective charm. No hand is seen, no figure interrupts the stillness, only the signs themselves resting on the page as if they have always been there. This is how the ink becomes more than ink. It becomes intention. It becomes belief made visible. And here the mystery deepens. Did scribes truly believe their ink could hold time, could hold eternity? Or did the act of believing make it so? In ancient Egypt, writing was not only a record of things that happened, it was a way of ensuring that things continued to happen. A name written could preserve a soul. An offering list written could keep nourishment flowing to a spirit beyond breath. A hymn copied and recited could keep gods awake, attentive, present. Ink was not passive. It was active, like breath. In the darkness of the workshop, where pigment is mixed with steady hands, it is easy to imagine the feeling that something sacred is being prepared, not because it is flashy or supernatural, but because it is careful, because it requires patience, because it acknowledges fragility. Papyrus is fragile. It dries, cracks, curls. It can burn. It can rot. It can be eaten by time. And yet, fragile materials carried immortal truths, a paradox held gently like a candle flame cupped from wind. Perhaps the ancients understood that the immortal does not always arrive through strength. Sometimes it arrives through repetition, through copying, through passing a tool down, through teaching a younger hand to grind pigment, to cut a reed, to mix soot and water until the darkness turns smooth. Tools were inherited like small holy things. A palette might outlast the one who held it. A reed pen might be trimmed by many hands. A bowl might hold countless nights. Whispers tell us that in scribal families, knowledge flowed like a quiet river. A father showed a son how to sharpen the reed at the correct angle, how to test the ink on a scrap, how to let the line breathe. A teacher corrected a student's sign until it matched the shape tradition demanded, not because tradition was harsh, but because the sign itself mattered. A sign was not simply a drawing, it was a vessel. A bird sign held the echo of flight. A water sign held the echo of the Nile. A star sign held the echo of the sky's deep chamber. And so writing became a kind of cosmic mimicry. The world translated into symbols, so the world could recognize itself and remain whole. In temple corridors, torchlight flickered over wall reliefs. Blacks and reds survived in cracks and hollows, the colors lingering like memory in stone. Some paintings crumbled, some carvings softened, yet in certain angles, the signs still caught shadow the way they once caught meaning. A corridor might be empty now. A shrine might be quiet. but the marks remain, veiled, stubborn, still. Where memory fades, ink sometimes remains as a thin miracle, dark strokes on pale fibers, red warnings like small moons. Sometimes a ceiling still bears star-marked patterns, dots and lines suggesting constellations, the night sky painted onto stone. The stars are cracked, yes, aged and flaked, but under lamplight and haze they seem to hover again, as if the chamber remembers what it once imitated. It is said that writing and the heavens were not separate. The sky was a script, the earth was a page, the gods were readers. Perhaps that is why ink felt like a bridge, because it allowed the human hand to speak in the language of eternity, quietly, humbly, without needing to shout across the distance between worlds. And yet uncertainty lingers like smoke. Even the most devoted scribe could not prove that the ink held time, could not step beyond death and return to confirm that the written spells opened every gate they promised. The ink might have been a tool of certainty or a tool of comfort shaped by hope. But does that distinction matter in the dark? If the ink soothed the living, guided the grieving, honored the dead, perhaps it did what it was meant to do. Beneath the silence, the chapter's emotional arc turns from curiosity to reverent wonder, not because we solve anything, but because we begin to feel the weight of devotion poured into such small things. A bowl, a reed, a palette, a dusting of soot, a smear of red earth. The materials are simple, the belief is vast. Now let the scene drift outward for a moment, out of the chamber, out of the workshop, toward the river itself. The Nile at twilight is a quiet ribbon, reflecting dusk sky blue. At its edge, black silt gathers where water kisses earth. Reeds bend and whisper. A distant temple silhouette rises from mist, softened as if half dreamed. The scribe's ink and the river's soil share a darkness. It is the same color that nourished crops, the same color that stained hands, the same color that made a mark on papyrus and said, "Remember." And then we drift back again, to the chamber, to the lamp. The flame is lower now, the oil is nearly spent. The light has turned warmer, more intimate, as if the chamber is drawing inward, preparing to sleep. The ink bowl sits as it always has, quiet and watchful. Its surface no longer shimmers as brightly. It has grown still, matte as midnight without stars. A faint veil of dust begins to settle, soft as ash, over the table, over the palette, over the edges of papyrus. This is how the world returns everything. Ink, once wet and gleaming, dries. Soot, once stirred into water, settles. Meaning, once carried on fragile fibers, drifts into other chambers, into stone, into memory, into the unseen places where stories sleep. The chapter closes by imagining the ink returning to dust, not as loss exactly, more like completion, a circle closing with quiet grace. A substance that once held symbols now becomes silence again. And yet the symbols do not vanish entirely. They remain, perhaps, in the mind that reads them. They remain in the breath that speaks them softly. They remain in the hush that follows them, like an echo after a door closes. It is said that some truths were never meant to be held forever in material form. Perhaps they were meant to pass through hands, like warmth. Perhaps they were meant to flicker, like lamplight on stone. Perhaps the ink itself was never the true container. Perhaps it was the act, the careful grinding, the steady mixing, the patient stroke that was sacred. Perhaps belief was the vessel all along. The lamp dims. The chamber grows quieter, if that is possible. Silence settles like ash, gentle and complete. And as sleep approaches, the listener is left with a simple sacred mystery: how fragile materials, night soot and river water, red earth and reed, once carried immortal truths, as if the world itself could be written into being. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven. Perhaps it was only meant to be whispered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. At the center of the day, when the sun stands high and unblinking, there is a courtyard that feels strangely like night. Not because it is dark, no, it is drenched in light. Sun spills over sandstone and whitewashed walls until the stone almost seems to glow from within. The air shimmers. Heat rises in faint veils, bending the edges of columns and archways into soft, wavering lines. And yet, beneath the silence, it feels like a room of whispers. It is said that there were places in ancient Egypt where voices learned to disappear, not through punishment, not through fear, but through purpose. A school courtyard like this one, open to the sky, framed by low colonnades, where young scribes sat in still rows, their bodies small against the vastness of stone and sun. No laughter rises, no shouting breaks the air, only the scratch of reeds, steady and patient, like insects singing in the heat. If you listen closely in your mind, you can almost hear it: the soft rasp of a reed tip against limestone, the faint brush of fibers against papyrus, the occasional pause where breath gathers and returns. Even the dust seems quieter here, drifting in slow spirals near the ground. This is the school of silent voices, a place where language is not spoken first, but carved into the body through repetition, a place where memory becomes sacred labor, a place where boys learn to carry the weight of signs, little chambers of meaning, before they are old enough to fully understand what they hold. Look at the courtyard as if you are standing at its threshold. The stones underfoot are worn, smoothed by time and sandals and endless small movements. There are reed mats laid out in careful order. On some, blank papyrus waits, pale, dry, almost shy. On others, there are practice shards of limestone, ostraca, smudged with repeated strokes. No human faces need to appear for you to feel their presence. The school itself is presence. The air is presence. The hush is presence. Whispers tell us that to become a scribe was not simply to learn a skill. It was to enter a narrower path, veiled from ordinary life. The fields were loud with wind and birds and labor. The riverbanks were alive with shouting and splashing and the rhythm of carrying. But the school demanded another kind of strength: stillness, attention, endurance in quiet. And so the initiation begins not with ceremony, but with routine, each day returning like the sun, each lesson repeating like the Nile's cycles. The young student sits cross-legged or kneeling, his posture trained to be steady. A reed pen is placed in his hand. The tip is cut at a precise angle so the stroke will not wander. He dips it into ink. He breathes. He makes a mark. A single sign, then another, and another. Beneath the silence, the signs begin to accumulate, not as sentences yet, but as shapes that must be mastered. The teacher does not speak loudly. The teacher does not rush. Correction arrives with the calm inevitability of water finding its level. A sign is wrong. It is not scolded into shame. It is simply repeated until it becomes right. There is something almost merciful in this method, though it is also relentless. No dramatic anger, no sharp humiliation, just the steady insistence that the hand must learn obedience to form. And in that obedience, the student slowly learns something deeper, that writing is not only made by the hand, it is made by the breath. Because repetition does a strange thing. At first, the boy thinks the signs are external, foreign shapes, things to imitate. His hand stiffens, his wrist aches, the reed slips, the ink pools too dark, dust clings to sweat at his temples, the sun presses down, the courtyard stays bright and quiet. But then, day after day, something shifts. The signs begin to sink inward. They move from the eye to the muscles, from the muscles to the pulse, from the pulse to the breath. He no longer has to think each stroke in the same way. The body remembers. The hand becomes a small ritual instrument, guided by repetition until the shapes feel as natural as inhaling and exhaling. Where memory fades, the school refuses to let it fade. The boy copies the same sign until it no longer belongs to him. It belongs to tradition. It belongs to the long chain of hands before his. It belongs to the quiet order that holds the world together. It is said that scribes carried the spine of civilization in their ink. They recorded grain and cattle, decrees and offerings, prayers and names. They preserved stories, laws, hymns, and the instructions that guided the dead through unseen gates. But all of that begins here, in this courtyard of sun and silence, where nothing grand is announced, only the slow shaping of patience, only the quiet forging of a mind. And as the lesson continues, a soft melancholy begins to gather at the edges of the story, not as sadness, but as weight. Because to become a scribe was to step away. The boy in the courtyard is not in the fields. He is not hauling, planting, harvesting. He is not living the loud communal life of ordinary labor. He is being shaped for something else, a narrower, lonelier path. There is promise in it, yes, release from physical toil, the possibility of a life indoors, shaded, protected from the harshest sun, the chance to rise in status, to sit near administrators, priests, even kings, the chance to leave marks that might outlast his own bones. But there is a cost, too, veiled and rarely spoken aloud. To learn writing is to be bound to it. To enter the world of signs is to live among rules. To be trained in order is to carry order even when the heart wants to wander. Knowledge opens gates, yet closes others forever. This is the contradiction that surfaces softly in the school of silent voices. Learning means freedom, but it also means obedience. The student's future may be lighter in physical burden, but heavier in expectation. The world may respect him, but it will also depend on him. His mistakes will not be casual. His lines will matter. His hand will be held to standards that do not bend easily. And even now, as he sits in bright midday heat, the boy can feel it like a shadow on his shoulder. He is not merely practicing. He is being chosen by the work. The courtyard itself carries symbols of this tension. On one wall, faded instructional texts run in neat rows. Some lines are corrected in red, the marks not angry but unmistakable, small warnings, small boundaries. The plaster crumbles in places, and the hieroglyphs break apart like half-remembered dreams. A reminder, even writing can decay, even instruction can become dust. So the school insists on memory. It insists on repetition, because ink can fade, but breath can carry. In a shaded corner, there is a stone basin. Water sits in it, cool and still, used to rinse reed pens. The surface reflects the courtyard in a wavering mirror, columns, light, the pale sky overhead. Dust has gathered in a thin spiral along the rim, as if even the debris here organizes itself into quiet patterns. The student dips the reed in water, shakes it gently, and begins again. Scratch, pause, scratch. The sound is small, but it fills the courtyard because nothing else competes with it. And in that emptiness, the work becomes almost hypnotic. The world narrows to the tip of the reed, to the shape of a sign, to the careful spacing between marks, to the rhythm of breath. It is said that in such places, silence is not absence. Silence is instruction. Silence teaches the mind to settle. Silence teaches the hand to listen. Silence teaches the student that meaning is not always loud. And perhaps this is why the school feels like an ancient ritual, because it is not teaching only writing. It is teaching a way of being, steady, attentive, responsible to something larger than oneself. Now imagine the moment when the courtyard's light begins to change. The sun, which has been high and white, starts to tilt. Shadows stretch longer across the stone. The colonnades glow with faded copper. The heat releases its grip little by little, as if the air itself exhales. This is the hour when the school feels most tender. The reed mats are gathered, practice tablets are stacked, broken reed tips, small failures, are swept aside without ceremony. Ink palettes are covered. The basin water darkens as the sky cools. Students rise, quietly. They do not erupt into noise. They do not scatter like startled birds. The discipline of the school clings to them even as they leave. They move through archways carved with worn symbols, their footsteps soft on the stones that have held generations of the same departing rhythm. Outside the gate, the world waits. Fields, homes, river wind, evening meals. But the signs go with them, not on papyrus alone, but inside the body now, inside the wrist, inside the breath. Because repetition has done its work. Where memory fades, the school has etched its lessons deeper than ink. As evening descends, the courtyard empties. The silence returns to being complete. Dust settles again in slow, gentle veils. A faint breeze passes through, lifting a few grains into the last light, like tiny drifting stars. And now, with no students present, you can sense something else. The signs remain, not only on tablets and walls, but in the air itself, as if the courtyard has absorbed them, as if the stone remembers the shape of every practiced line, as if the school is still teaching even when no one is seated. This is the hush the chapter leaves behind, the feeling that learning is an act of surrender, surrender to form, Surrender to patience. Surrender to a tradition older than any single child. And there is comfort in that surrender, too, because in a world where so much changes, the steady return of practice becomes its own kind of shelter, a rhythm that holds you the way a lullaby holds you, softly, repeatedly, without demanding urgency. Some lessons, it seems, do not end when the day ends. They simply quiet themselves and wait. Marked by the moon, the courtyard cools, the sky deepens into dusk, the last light slips away from the stones, and the shadows become gentle again, like folded cloth. Perhaps the true school was never the courtyard at all. Perhaps it was the silence. Perhaps it was the repetition. Perhaps it was the slow discovery that meaning can be built one quiet mark at a time until it becomes part of you. And as you drift toward sleep, you may feel it, the echo of the reed's scratch, the steady pace of learning, the calm insistence of the signs. Beneath the silence, the school remains. Where memory fades, it teaches again. Perhaps it was never meant to be finished. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that there are rooms where the air remembers breath. At the edge of the desert, beneath layers of sand and stone, a tomb opens into such a room. Moonlight slips inside through a narrow passage, pale and cautious, as if unsure whether it is welcome. The walls are freshly painted, their colors still holding the warmth of human touch. Black and red signs move in quiet rows, their forms precise, deliberate, alive with meaning. Incense hangs heavy in the air. Its smoke coils upward in slow spirals, carrying resin and sweetness, a fragrance meant to linger long after footsteps have faded. Beneath the silence, the tomb feels attended, not crowded, not disturbed, but aware. This is where the book waits. Not bound like a modern thing, not resting on a shelf, but spread across walls and papyrus, layered into stone and fiber, written into the architecture of farewell. A book not meant to be read by the living, but to watch over the dead. Here, beside the tomb wall, words take on a different gravity. They are no longer meant to be debated or admired. They are meant to guide, to protect, to remind a soul of its own name when breath has fallen away. Whispers tell us that the ancient Egyptians did not imagine death as a sudden silence. They imagined it as a passage, long, veiled, uncertain, a journey through chambers unseen, where doors might ask questions and shadows might remember your fears. And so the dead were not sent alone. Scribes came with them, quietly, through ink and sign. These were not companions of flesh, but of preparation, hands that shaped the words meant to walk beside the departed when no living voice could follow. The funerary texts were written carefully, reverently, as if each line were a small lantern placed along a dark path. Some were spells, some were hymns, some were instructions spoken so softly they resemble prayers. Each one carried a promise: you will not be forgotten. You will not be without guidance. Look closely at the wall. The paint is still fresh enough to catch light. Black ink anchors the words, firm and steady. red signs appear like quiet warnings, markers of danger or of power that must be approached with care. The plaster beneath them is smooth, but already it has begun its slow work of change. Tiny cracks form at the edges. Time has entered the room. Yet the words remain clear. Beneath the silence, you can almost feel the intention pressed into them. These texts were not casual creations. They were the result of generations of copying, refining, believing. Long before they reached this tomb, they lived on papyrus, on practice shards, in the memories of scribes trained to carry precision like a sacred weight. It is said that some spells were meant to awaken doors, gates that recognize the written sign the way a lock recognizes its key. Others named guardians, not to summon them, but to still them. To know a name was to hold a measure of power. To speak it correctly, even in ink, was to pass unharmed. Some passages spoke directly to the heart. They reminded it who it was. They told it not to accuse itself too harshly when weighed. They whispered assurances. You are known. You are remembered. You may pass. As the exploration deepens, curiosity gives way to something quieter. A gentle melancholy begins to seep through the chamber, like cool air at night, because woven into these words is not only confidence, but fear. Hope and fear sit close together here. The hope is clear, that the afterlife can be navigated, that order exists beyond death, just as it exists in life, that with the right words, spoken or written, a soul can find its way through shadow into light. But the fear is present too, though never shouted. It appears in the repetition, in the careful listing of dangers, in the insistence on protection. Why so many spells if the path were simple? Why so many reminders if the heart could not forget itself? Perhaps these texts were not written because the Egyptians were certain. Perhaps they were written because they were not. This is the sacred contradiction at the heart of the book that watched the dead. The words promise certainty, but they exist because certainty was never guaranteed. Were these texts maps, charting an actual terrain beyond life, or were they prayers, dressed in the language of instruction so the mind could rest? The tomb does not answer. The walls do not explain themselves. They simply hold the words patiently. Look upward. The ceiling is painted with stars, small white and gold dots scattered across deep blue. Constellations stretch overhead, echoing the sky above the desert. The dead are placed beneath the cosmos, as if to say, your journey continues here. You are not lost. You are still under the same vast order. Dust drifts through the moonlight, slow and deliberate. Each grain catches a hint of silver before settling again. Even the dust feels ceremonial. In a niche, a papyrus roll rests on a stone ledge, wrapped in linen. It is not meant to be unrolled again. Its purpose has already been fulfilled by being here. Beside it, a small clay burner smolders, then fades. The incense thins. Smoke becomes memory. The scribes who prepared this place are already gone. Their footsteps no longer echo in the passage. Their lamps have been extinguished. They have done what they could. They have given language to the unknown. And then, as the ritual reaches its quiet end, the tomb begins to close. Stone doors slide into place like a sound of distant thunder softened by earth. Dust lifts briefly, then settles. The outside world recedes. Light narrows to a thin line, then disappears entirely. The tomb is sealed. Inside, the words remain. Alone with the dead. This is where the book truly begins its watch. No eyes read it now, no hands trace the signs, but the words do not require witnesses. They exist as offerings, suspended in time, waiting to be needed. Perhaps the soul pauses here, listening. Perhaps it recognizes the signs, not as letters, but as familiar rhythms, echoes of temple chants, murmurs heard in life, patterns once practiced and memorized. Perhaps the words rise gently, not as commands, but as companions. Or perhaps nothing happens at all. This too is possible. The tomb does not confirm the success of its own magic. It only preserves intention. Beneath the silence, this uncertainty becomes almost comforting, because it reminds us that belief does not require proof to be sincere, that offering words to the unknown is a deeply human act, one that does not demand a guaranteed return. Outside, night deepens over the desert. The tomb entrance, now sealed, is marked only by stone and sand. The moon drifts higher, pale and indifferent. The stars above echo the stars painted below, separated by layers of earth and time. Inside, the chamber grows cooler. The painted figures soften as shadows claim them. The black ink absorbs what little light remains. The red marks dim, but do not vanish. Where memory fades, the words endure a little longer, not forever, but long enough to hold hope, long enough to honor fear, long enough to say, "You were loved enough to be guided." And so the chapter fades, not with resolution, but with rest. The scribe has stepped away. The tomb is quiet. The book waits. Perhaps it was never meant to be read again. Perhaps its true reader is silence itself. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and beneath the silence, the dead are not alone. The Ledger of the Living World. It is said that dawn along the Nile is not only a beginning, it is a returning. Before the sun lifts its full face above the palm line, the river wears a veil. Mist floats low over the water, pale and slow, as though the night is reluctant to release its hold. Reeds bend at the bank, their tips beaded with moisture. The mud-dark shoreline glistens, and the world feels newly washed, quiet, balanced, waiting. In that soft hour, the living world is counted, not with noise, not with celebration, but with a steadiness so calm it could be mistaken for silence itself. A low stone platform rests at the river's edge. Empty baskets sit nearby. Measuring jars, clay, worn, familiar, wait like patient instruments. A staff leans against a step, its markings faint but precise. The river moves, and the air carries the smell of water, earth, and distant grain. This is where the ledger begins, not as a book bound in leather, but as a series of marks, numbers, and lists, written with a reed that drinks ink and returns it as meaning. A quiet architecture, unseen by most, holding civilization upright. Whispers tell us that ancient Egypt did not run on grandeur alone. Temples, monuments, and kings shimmered at the surface, but beneath the silence there were systems as delicate as papyrus fibers. Storehouses had to be filled, offerings had to arrive on time, workers had to be fed, boats had to be accounted for, taxes measured, livestock counted, days tracked, seasons named. Order was not automatic. Order was maintained, and in the early light near the breadth of the river, that maintenance took the form of careful tallies. Imagine the scene without needing faces. You do not have to see the scribes to feel their presence. The tools speak for them. A clay tally tablet, smooth from handling, a reed pen resting beside a small pile of grain kernels, the faint imprint of hieroglyphs or simple numeric marks etched or inked into stone. Each kernel catches the dawn like a tiny sun. Each mark is a small promise. Numbers in this world are not cold. They are devotional. They are the calm language of balance. To count is to acknowledge. To list is to honor what must be held steady. It is said that the Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the principle of harmony, truth, the world in its rightful alignment. We often imagine Ma'at in grand moral terms, but here, at the riverbank, it is practical. It is measured. It is the difference between abundance and hunger, between temple incense and empty altars. A tally is not just a tally. It is a thread keeping things from unraveling. Beneath the silence, the ledger is a kind of prayer. In the administrative wings of temples and in the shadowed rooms of granaries, lists were made and remade. The words might seem mundane to us now: grain received, grain distributed, cattle born, cattle lost, jars sealed, jars opened. Yet in every line there is an awareness of fragility. Because a single missed measure could ripple outward, a miscount could become a shortage could become unrest, and so the scribe's hand had to be steady, not because the work was glamorous, but because it was foundational. The narrative deepens gently into the places these numbers lived. Step into a granary in your mind. The air inside is cool, dusted with the scent of dried grain. High beams cross overhead, dark against pale slats of light. Sunbeams slip in through narrow openings, cutting bright shafts through floating dust. Baskets and sacks are arranged in quiet order, as if the room itself is trained to be careful. Along one wall, storage jars stand in a row, tall clay bodies sealed with mud stoppers. Simple painted marks label them, symbols, numbers, a few strokes that hold whole seasons of labor. The nearest jar's markings are crisp in your imagination. The rest of the line dissolves into haze, as if the future is always slightly blurred. Outside, the fields spread in soft gold, irrigation channels glint, grain heads bend under their own weight. The sun climbs slowly, and the mist begins to thin. The world looks abundant, but abundance is not a guarantee. It is the result of cycles and the careful stewardship of those cycles. This is where awe begins to replace curiosity, because the more you look at this system, the more you feel how easily it could collapse. Civilization is often pictured as stone, solid, immovable. Yet here, beneath the surface, it is held by counting, by measuring,
by writing marks that can fit on a shard of limestone. A fragile thing holding heavy weight. That is the contradiction at the heart of the ledger of the living world.
Lists seem ordinary. They are not carved into monuments. They do not sing like hymns. They do not glitter like gold. Yet without them, temples would starve, cities would fade, armies would falter, festivals would fall silent. The sacred hides inside routine. In a corridor within a temple's administrative wing, you might find painted plaster walls covered in faded inventory lines. Black ink runs in neat bands. Occasionally, a red mark appears, an emphasis, a correction, a warning. Torchlight shadows waver across the writing, making the signs seem to shift as the flame breathes. It is said that when a scribe wrote, he did not simply record, he participated in keeping the world aligned. In that sense, the ledger was not merely an archive, it was an instrument, a scale, a balance. Consider the image of a scale set on stone, its two shallow pans empty, waiting. Even without anything placed upon it, the balance suggests a principle, that everything must be weighed, not just materially, but morally, spiritually. That fairness is not an idea alone, it is a practice. The ledger is the practice. Each tally becomes a quiet vow. We will remember what we have. We will distribute what we must. We will not let the temple lamps go out. We will not let the workers go unfed. We will not let the river's gifts vanish into chaos. And yet, time moves. The sun climbs, dawn becomes morning, the cool mist lifts from the water, and the Nile shows its dark, steady surface. Boats drift at the bank, linen-covered cargo bundles sit waiting, their shapes softened by haze. A measuring staff leans against a stone step, its marks worn faint by repetition. Under all this, another truth stirs, one that arrives not with sadness, but with a quiet human ache. How few names are remembered. We can name pharaohs, dynasties, famous priests, great builders, but the scribes who counted grain, who recorded deliveries, who tracked days and debts and offerings, most of them vanish into anonymity. Their work shaped centuries, but their identities dissolved like ink in water. Where memory fades, the ledger remains, but the hand that made it often disappears. There is something almost poetic about this, and also mournful. The civilization stands tall, but the people who held its hidden beams are seldom named. Their lives were spent in rooms like granaries and offices, in corridors where torches flickered, in courtyards where students practiced, in the soft scratch of reeds against tablet. They were not celebrated as heroes, they were trusted as necessities. It is said that the truest foundations are the ones we do not see, and perhaps that is why this chapter belongs to nighttime listening, because in the quiet hours, we begin to notice the unseen structures that hold our own lives together, the small routines, the unnoticed labors, the careful record-keeping of ordinary days. We begin to understand that the world is not held up only by grand gestures. It is held up by repeated care, by attention, by steady hands, by someone remembering to count. As the chapter slows, imagine the ledger itself, not as a single object, but as a presence spread across time. Clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, ostraca, wall lists, labels on jars, marks on wood, all of it woven into a web of remembering. A web so quiet that the loud world rarely notices it, and yet everything depends on it. Now let the scene return to the Nile bank as late morning approaches. The stone platform that held baskets and jars is mostly empty now. Mist has thinned into a faint haze. The river glints. On the sand, a trail of footprints remains, soft impressions that will soon be erased by wind, water, or the passing of other feet. A single clay jar sits alone in the brighter light, its seal intact, its painted mark simple. Nearby, a few grain husks catch on a stone edge. Dust gathers in shallow spirals where shadows linger. No human voices are present. The work has been done. And still, beneath the silence, the ledger continues, because order is never finished. It is renewed like dawn. It is maintained like a flame. The emotional closure arrives gently, not as an ending, but as a soft honoring. We honor the unnoticed. We honor the quiet labor that kept temples singing and cities breathing. We honor the smallest marks, the humble strokes of ink that once held the weight of the world. Perhaps the ledger was never meant to be admired. Perhaps it was meant to disappear into function, like roots beneath a tree. Yet here, in the hush, we can feel its sacredness. A civilization does not endure on stone alone. It endures on memory, on measurement, on balance, on the careful promise that someone, somewhere, will keep count so that life can continue without collapsing into noise. And as sleep draws near, you may find comfort in that thought, the thought that even the smallest marks mattered, that quiet work mattered, that the living world was held day after day by hands that moved softly and steadily beneath the sun and beneath the silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be remembered by name. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Beneath the silence, when the last footstep has softened into the corridors and even the dogs have folded their ears into sleep, a single lamp remains awake. Its flame is small, almost shy, an amber bead trembling in a bowl of oil. It throws a circle of light onto a table scarred by years of elbows, reeds, and patient breath. The room beyond that circle is a dark sea. The walls do not announce themselves. The ceiling is only a suggestion. Everything that matters is held inside the lamplight, like a secret cupped in two hands. On the table, a palette with two shallow wells, one dark as river mud, one red as dried clay, a reed pen shaved to a careful point, a roll of papyrus, or a board washed white again and again. So many clean slates, so many beginnings. There are tiny flecks of ink where someone once paused too long, where thought became heavy and spilled. There is dust in the corners, fine as ground stone, catching the light in slow spirals. And there is the work. It is said that some rooms remember every word ever written inside them, not the meaning alone, but the silence act, the drag of pen across fiber, the soft tap of a stylus, the pause where the hand hovers, listening to a sentence before it is born. Tonight, this room is listening.
the scribe has been here since the sun was still gold on the courtyards, since the last official seal was pressed into wax, since the apprentices were shooed away with a tired laugh and a warning to return before dawn. He did not leave when the voices faded. He did not follow the others into blankets and dreams. He stayed, not because he is punished, though there are days it feels like that, not because he is heroic, though the city will later speak of scribes with reverence, as if their hands were made of pure discipline. He stayed because the words must be carried across time, and someone has to carry them. His hand moves in a rhythm that is almost prayer, a line, a breath, a line, another breath. The lamp shortens the night into a smaller, manageable thing. Outside, the world is vast and indifferent, stars turning, winds combing the roofs, the river sliding along its dark route. Inside, the universe narrows to ink and accuracy, to the sacred tension between what is remembered and what is lost. Whispers tell us that in older days, people believed the gods leaned close to watch scribes at their tables, not in thunder, not in spectacle, in quiet. A god does not need to shout to make you careful. A god only needs to be near. In temple schools and palace rooms, where the written sign could decide how grain was counted, how taxes were owed, how prayers were offered, the act of copying was not merely work, it was vigil. To form a sign incorrectly was to chip a corner off the world. To copy a name wrong was to misplace a soul. So the scribe keeps his eyes open when they want to close. He keeps the line straight when it wants to wander. He measures his spacing like a mason setting stones. Accuracy is not a preference, it is an offering. Somewhere, long before this night, a teacher leaned over his shoulder and tapped the board with a red-marked correction. Too wide, too cramped, the curve imperfect. Try again. The teacher's breath smelled of ink and patience. The scribe learned that the page is a place where mercy and severity share the same seat. And now, in this late hour, the teacher is gone. The city sleeps. Yet the teacher's red ink lives on, invisible but felt, like a hand guiding the rest from beyond the room. The scribe does not write quickly. He writes as though each sign is being carved into the air. There are moments when the flame wavers and the shadows crawl up the wall, and the scribe pauses, not from fear but from listening, because in the deep night everything becomes symbolic. The palette becomes a small altar, the reed pen becomes a slender wand, the papyrus becomes a river that must be crossed without slipping, and the silence becomes a presence. Beneath the silence, another truth breathes. The scribe is alone, and his body knows it. He feels the ache at the base of his neck where hours gather like stones. He feels the grit in his eyes, sand, dust, sleep trying to claim its portion. His fingers, stained and slightly cramped, keep going anyway, because the work does not care whether a hand is tired. The work only asks, will you finish what you began? It is said that scribes were honored, that they stood apart from common labor, spared the heaviest loads, granted the rare luxury of learning, that to write was to step into a cleaner, higher life. And it is true, mostly. But honor has its own hunger. It asks for nights like this. It asks for the quiet surrender of comfort. It asks for the willingness to become a bridge, even if a bridge is walked on more than it is thanked. The scribe knows the contradiction intimately.
to give life to words while slowly emptying his own strength. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The small rustle as the page is adjusted, the soft scrape of reed, the exhale but tries not to become a yawn. The scribe's breathing becomes part of the text, like punctuation. Each breath says continue. Each pause says be precise. Each blink says do not vanish. Outside, the stars remain star-marked and indifferent, scattered like salt across a dusk sky blue. Perhaps the moon has drifted into a thin veil of cloud, marked by the moon, yet softened, as if even the sky is trying to be gentle with the sleepless. Inside, the lamp has begun to change. Oil is finite. Flame is mortal. The light that once stood tall now leans, lengthening shadows across the table. The scribe watches the wick as if it is an oracle. He has seen this before, the moment when the lamplight begins to thin, and the page becomes harder to read, and the room beyond the circle of light begins to press inward. His hand steadies, not faster, never fast, but steadier, more deliberate, as if the approaching dark demands a final purity. There is a tenderness in this, though few would call it that. This is how devotion often looks, not grand, not loud, not adorned with ceremony, but persistent in the dim hours when no one is watching except whatever watches from the unseen. The scribe's vigil is a small human answer to an endless question. How do we keep memory from dissolving? He writes names that might otherwise fall into dust. He copies instructions that might otherwise be forgotten. He preserves hymns that might otherwise drift away like smoke. He is not making himself immortal. He is making something else endure. And in doing so, he becomes strange, because the longer the night goes on, the more the scribe feels less like a man at a table and more like a living instrument, an echo with fingers, a channel through which older voices pass. The words are not his, yet they move through his hand as if they have chosen it. Perhaps this is why scribes were feared a little, in some places, in some times, not because they carried weapons, but because they carried permanence, because they could trap a moment in symbols, because they could make a command last beyond the breath of the one who spoke it. Where memory fades, the written line remains. The flame dips again. For a moment, the scribe's shadow jumps, tall and distorted on the wall, like an ancient figure in a cave painting, like a spirit briefly given shape. He does not look up. He does not chase the superstition. He has learned that the night offers illusions the way the desert offers mirages, not to deceive, but to reveal how badly we want certainty. His eyes sting. His shoulders tighten. The reed pen is lighter than it should be, and yet it feels heavy, heavy with the weight of what it carries. He finishes a line, then another. Then he reaches the end of a section, one small completed island in a sea of text. He pauses, and in that pause something shifts in the room. It is not dramatic, it is subtle, like the moment before sleep when you realize you are already drifting. The scribe sets the reed down. He looks at the inkwells. The dark one is low, the red one is smeared at the rim. Both have served their purpose. The page holds its symbols, calm and orderly, like stars arranged into constellations. And the lamp? The lamp is nearly done. The flame shrinks until it is more glow than fire. It makes the room feel ancient, as if it has traveled backward in time. The corners of the chamber return to their original mystery. The table, the page, the tools, everything seems to float on the surface of darkness. It is said that some work continues even after we sleep. The scribe knows this, not as philosophy, but as fact, because the words will remain awake when he cannot. They will live in the scroll chest, in the temple archive, in the mind of a student who copies them later. They will move from hand to hand like a secret torch. They will outlast the oil. They will outlast the reed. They may even outlast the name of the person who stayed behind tonight to make sure each sign was true. The flame trembles one last time. A thin ribbon of smoke curls upward, spiral, delicate, almost ceremonial. The wick darkens. The lamplight collapses into itself, and then it is gone. Darkness returns, not as an ending, but as a restoration. The room becomes a sealed chamber again. The city continues sleeping. The river continues moving. The stars continue their slow turning. And yet, somewhere in the dark, the words remain. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, this quiet devotion, this invisible labor. Perhaps it was only meant to be felt, faintly, the way we feel a distant chant through a temple wall. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, you may sense it too, that the night is not empty, that beneath the silence something is still writing, softly, endlessly, into the memory of the world.
The chapter begins with stone. Not a grand monument at first, just a single sign cut deep into a block that has forgotten its origin. The carved channels are filled with dust the color of sand beige and old bone. The edges are softened, half erased by centuries of wind, salt, and the slow abrasion of time. Yet the mark still holds its shape, stubborn as a memory that refuses to leave. It is said that stone is patient. Whispers tell us it does not hurry to reveal what it knows. And here, beneath the silence, the sign waits. The morning air is cool enough to feel like breath from a hidden chamber. Mist clings to the lower steps. Somewhere beyond the frame of broken walls, a river moves without speaking. Above, the sky is washed in dusk sky blue, though dawn is coming, while the first light touches the relief so gently it seems to ask permission. A single hieroglyph can look nothing more than decoration to the untrained eye. A bird, a reed, a circle, a twist of rope, a seated figure now chipped away until it becomes an absence shaped like a body. But in the old understanding, a sign was never only a sign. In the old understanding, writing did not merely describe the world, it participated in it. Where memory fades, the carved line remains, and so people began to wonder if the carved line could hold more than meaning. They began to feel, quietly, that it could hold a person. The name, especially, was not treated as a label. It was treated as a living strand of identity, something that could cling to a statue, a stela, a painted wall, a coffin board, a ring. To place a name on an image could make that image a kind of anchor, a second body for the one who was gone. To speak or write the name was to keep the person present in the world's attention,
which mattered deeply in a universe where attention was a form of power. So imagine the craftsman who first cut this sign, not as a dramatic figure, but as a steady hand in torchlight. The chisel strikes, the stone answers, dust rises in a pale spiral. The groove becomes a path, and the path becomes a symbol, and the symbol becomes a doorway. And inside that doorway, hidden like a seed inside a shell, is the possibility of a name. In many places, the most protected names were enclosed, held inside an oval loop, a cartouche, a stretched ring that suggests eternity and shelter at once. Even the shape carries a promise. What is surrounded is guarded. What is guarded can endure.
It is said that to inscribe a royal name within such a boundary was not simply to identify a king. It was to keep that king's identity intact against forces that would unravel it: decay, forgetting, political hatred, the simple carelessness of time. But the chapter's secret is this: the fear was not only about kings, it was about everyone. Because if a name is essence, then losing the name is not a minor loss. It becomes a second death, quiet, bureaucratic, and final. Not the death of the body, but the death of recognition. And recognition in the ancient mind was nourishment. Picture a tomb wall painted with offerings, bread loaves, beer jars, geese, lotus blossoms. In the logic of symbol and ritual, these images are not only art, they are a way of sustaining the dead through representation and remembrance. The name, written nearby, ties the gifts to the correct receiver. Without the name, the offerings lose their address. Without the address, the spirit becomes unmoored. So the scribe, the mason, the painter, all of them become caretakers of identity. Their work is not only skilled, it is charged. A line cut wrong is an error. A name cut away is an attack. This is where the power and danger of naming begin to thicken, like fog gathering between columns. Because if writing a name can preserve, then destroying a name can end. Beneath the silence, you can almost hear the sound of that destruction, the sharper, angrier chisel, the deliberate scraping, the insistence of removal, not the casual break of a fallen wall, but the targeted violence of erasure. History gives us moments when this was done on purpose, when a ruler's memory was attacked long after their heartbeat had stopped. One of the most haunting examples is Hatshepsut, a pharaoh whose statues were smashed and whose name and image were removed from monuments in a systematic way, as if someone hoped to pull her back out of existence by peeling her from the stone. And what does that tell you, softly, without any lecture? It tells you people believed the stone mattered. It tells you they believed the sign mattered. It tells you they believed the name was not only sound, but substance. If the world is made of symbols, if a sign can carry being, then politics becomes more than laws and armies. It becomes a struggle over what is allowed to be remembered. This is not only an Egyptian instinct, of course. Many cultures have feared the endurance of names and sought to control it. But here, in the language of hieroglyphs, the fear becomes especially intimate because the writing itself is so alive with image. A name is not abstract letters, it is birds and reeds and suns and waterlines, each one a small creature or element pressed into service. And so the title returns to you, the hidden name within the sign.
Because a sign can outlast the mouth that once spoke it, a sign can remain when the person is gone. A sign can become a shell. And shells are strange things. They preserve shape while the life inside has departed. Now the chapter drifts deeper, away from the certainty of museums and into the hush of unanswered questions. What happens when the name survives, but no one can read it? What happens when the sign endures, but its sound is lost? There is a different kind of erasure then, slower, quieter, almost innocent, not the chisel, but the closing of the mind, the end of a tradition, the last teacher dying before the last student is ready, the library burning not from hatred, but from accident. A carved cartouche on a lintel can still be beautiful even when the name inside it becomes mute. The loop still promises protection. The protected thing, however, becomes a mystery. And mystery can feel like sorrow, because the stone remains and yet the person recedes. Meaning shifts. Identity dissolves into pattern. This is the ache at the center of the chapter. Not only that names were erased, but that names can fade without anyone meaning to erase them at all. Stand again before that half-erased hieroglyph. Notice how the missing pieces invite imagination. A chip in the stone becomes a question. A worn curve becomes a guess. You can feel your mind wanting to restore what is absent, the way the tongue wants to complete a half-heard word. But there is humility here too. Where memory fades, we are reminded that we do not own the past. We approach it like a temple at dusk, quietly, with respect, knowing much will remain behind veils. It is said that anonymity is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is simply the final state of most lives. A farmer's name written on a pot shard may outlive him by a few generations and then vanish. A child's name painted on a toy may last only until the wood rots. Even a king's name, guarded by stone and ring shapes of protection, can be softened by centuries into unreadable beauty. And yet, the signs endure more often than the voices. This is why the chapter's emotion tilts toward quiet sorrow rather than tragedy. It is not loud grief. It is the gentle recognition that time is a wide oceanic force, and we are all carried by it. Still, in the old belief, there is comfort hidden under the fear. To write the name was to offer continuity. To keep names in circulation, in prayers, in records, in carved lists, was to keep souls tethered to a living world. So perhaps the real ritual is not only in stone cutting, but in attention. To look carefully is a kind of devotion. To pronounce a name correctly is a kind of care. To trace the groove of a fading sign with your eyes, without taking, without claiming, can be a form of remembering. Now the light lowers. The mist thickens along the ground. The carved hieroglyph returns to its oldest companion, shadow. The grooves hold dusk like water held in a shallow channel. A small curl of dust lifts and settles again, spiral and slow, as if the ruin itself is breathing. Marked by the moon, the stone seems less like an object and more like a witness. And you are left with the final hush, identity dissolving into symbol. No clear conclusion because the past does not end neatly, it simply recedes. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully recovered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, you may feel it, the strange comfort that even when names vanish, the world still carries their outlines, a carved hollow where a sign once spoke, a ring shape that once protected, a wall that still holds the pressure of someone's intention. Stone remains, meaning shifts, and somewhere beneath the silence, the hidden name waits within the sign. The chapter opens at the riverbank before the day fully admits it is day. A thin mist rests on the water like a veil that has not yet chosen to lift. The reeds stand close together, their green stalks rising from the shallows in quiet ranks, as if they are listening for a command from the dawn. The light is pale, dusk sky blue turning slowly towards sandstone yellow, while the river moves with the soft certainty of something older than names. It is said the Nile does not speak, but it remembers. Along the bank, papyrus grows where the mud is generous, tall, reed-like stems, crowned with tufted umbels that catch the first breath of wind. In that breath, the plant bends and returns, bending again, patient, oceanic in its rhythm, though it stands in fresh water. Whispers tell us that what becomes sacred often begins as something ordinary. A blade of bronze, a careful cut, stalks gathered into bundles. The plant is taken at dawn not for drama, but for timing. Cool air, steady hands, the sense that the day's first act should be deliberate. No procession, no chanting, only the hush of work that knows it will outlast the worker. From river to workshop, the papyrus travels like a small secret carried under the arm. Inside, the air changes. It becomes dry, still. The scent of plant sap mingles with dust and sun-warmed stone. Here, the papyrus is no longer scenery. It is becoming a surface, something meant to receive ink, meaning, and breath. The outer rind is removed, and the pale pith is revealed, sponge-like, luminous, almost vulnerable. Long, thin strips are cut from that inner body, ribbons of living matter made into something that will soon pretend it never lived. The strips are laid side by side, then another layer is placed across them, perpendicular like a woven crossing of destinies. Then comes pressure, pressed, pounded, coaxed into unity, until the plant's own moisture and stickiness help it hold together. Beneath the silence, the craft begins to feel like a kind of alchemy, not the loud kind with smoke and thunder, but the slow kind, the transformation of soft into lasting, of water-fed reed into a page that can travel far from the river and still carry the river's memory inside its fibers. The sheet is dried, sun and time working as invisible tools. The surface is smoothed, sometimes polished, until it becomes receptive. It is here that the title turns warm in the mind, papyrus like skin, not because it resembles skin perfectly, but because it behaves like it, sensitive to humidity, vulnerable to tearing, marked forever by pressure and scratch. It can be bruised by careless handling. It can be strengthened by careful storage. It can, in the right conditions, endure. And then the most intimate moment, ink meets surface.
A reed pen touches down, and the papyrus accepts it. The first stroke is a small incision of meaning. The second stroke is a promise. The fibers take pigment the way dry earth takes rain, quickly, decisively, leaving no doubt that something has happened. This is where curiosity becomes reverence, because the act feels strangely personal, even when no person is shown. A blank sheet is not merely blank, it is unclaimed, and when a mark is placed upon it, one sign, one curve, one line, the sheet becomes a witness. It is said that writing can be an offering, even when it records something mundane. A list of grain, a letter sent across a city, a name copied carefully, a hymn written so it can be recited again when the original voice is gone. Papyrus held all of this, not because it was immortal, but because it was available, light enough to carry, smooth enough to write upon, reliable enough to trust with what mattered. Sheets could be joined into longer rolls, edges could be glued into continuity, as if time itself could be extended by careful seams. Yet a contradiction whispers through every layer of fiber. Papyrus was fragile, and everyone knew it. Water could rot it, rough handling could split it along its strips, a careless fold could become a permanent scar. And still, this is the astonishing thing, people entrusted it with eternity. They handed it prayers, they handed it law, they handed it the names of the dead and the stories of the living. Why would a civilization place so much faith in something so delicate? Perhaps because the fragility was part of the ritual. A stone inscription can feel final, almost arrogant in its permanence. Papyrus feels human by comparison. It survives only when cared for. It asks to be protected from damp, from fire, from neglect. It requires relationship. In that sense, it turns memory into a shared responsibility, a gentle agreement between generations. I will keep this safe so you can know what I knew. Beneath the silence, imagine the storage rooms, archives where rolls are stacked in niches, where dust gathers in soft spirals, where the air is dry enough for centuries to pass without devouring the fibers. Imagine a hand unrolling a scroll slowly, respecting the way the strips want to separate if rushed. Imagine the faint sound, the dry whisper of material remembering it was once a plant. Modern caretakers will tell you what ancient people understood instinctively. Papyrus survives best when it is kept from moisture, because water invites organic decay. This is why deserts can preserve what wetter lands would lose, and why so many ancient voices arrive to us as fragments, edges chewed away by time, but centers still speaking. And still, even in the desert, nothing is guaranteed. A scroll can crumble when touched, a sheet can fracture into flakes, a line of ink can fade until it becomes a ghost of itself. The material teaches a quiet lesson. Endurance is not the same as permanence. Survival is not the same as invincibility. So the chapter drifts toward sadness, but not despair. It is a gentle sadness, the kind you feel when you realize that even sacred things are temporary. Even carefully made pages have a lifespan. Even the most devoted hand cannot stop the world from moving. The papyrus, in the end, returns toward what it came from, toward dust, toward silence.
Picture a forgotten roll in a collapsed room. The roof has fallen long ago. The floor is layered with grit and small stones. Light enters only through cracks, thin as threads. The papyrus lies there, curled in on itself, like something trying to keep warm. Time presses down, not all at once, but steadily. The fibers dry too far. They lose their flexibility. They begin to break along the very seams that once gave them strength. A corner snaps, a strip separates, a sheet becomes fragments. It is said that impermanence is not cruelty,
It is the rule of all made things. And yet, whispers tell us, words are restless. When a papyrus sheet fails, the words do not necessarily die. Sometimes they have already been copied to another roll, carried into another archive, translated into another script, repeated aloud until they live in memory rather than fiber. Sometimes they have been carved into stone after first being drafted on papyrus. Sometimes they survive only as echoes, quotes, references, retellings, like music heard through a wall. So the ending is not an ending, it is a fade. The last image is not destruction, but dissolution. A sheet crumbles at the edge. Dust lifts in the air, a slow spiral, catching light and then losing it. The room remains, the river remains, the idea of writing remains, this delicate decision to place meaning onto a surface and hope it will be met again. Where memory fades, something still lingers. Perhaps it was never meant to be held forever in the hand. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as you rest, you are left with the quiet truth inside the title. Papyrus like water, carrying what it can. Papyrus like skin, marked by every touch. Fragile, yes, and still trusted with eternity.
The opening begins with a descent. A stone stair, narrow enough that the walls feel close. The steps are worn into shallow hollows by years of careful feet. Above, the temple's public spaces have gone quiet. No sandals, no murmured offerings, no measured calls between pillars, only the slow settling of night. Below, the air turns cool. Beneath the silence, the temperature changes first, and then the sound. A temple has many voices in daylight, bronze doors, chanting, the soft rasp of brooms, the distant hush of a courtyard fountain. But under the stone floors, those voices thin until they become a single steady quiet, like the pause between breaths. A lamp is carried down, not bright, not bold. Its flame is restrained, as though it too understands this is a place of listening. Light touches the stairs in a long, trembling ribbon. The walls catch it, then let it go. Dust wakes in the beam and drifts upward in slow spirals, like offerings made of air. At the bottom, a storeroom. It is said that what matters most is often placed where few will look. The door is heavy wood or fitted stone. The hinge answers with a small complaint, then yields. The air inside has been sealed long enough to feel ancient. It carries a faint dryness, a scent of plant fiber and clay, and something else, something like time itself pressed into stillness. Scrolls sleep here, not on a table, not open, not in the posture of performance. They rest in chests, in jars, in niches cut into the walls. Some are wrapped, some are tied, some are enclosed in boxes that once bore painted guardians. The room has no windows, only the lamp's small circle of gold. Beyond it, darkness gathers like a cloak, and in that darkness, the archive reveals its true nature, a heart that beats without sound. Temples were not only places of worship, they were engines of continuity, places where rituals were repeated precisely, where offerings were measured, where calendars were kept, where records and sacred texts were preserved. In Egypt, many major temples are described as having libraries of ritual papyri, and at least in some cases, a house of life connected to the work of compiling and copying cultural knowledge. But this is not a lecture room. This is dream space. So history arrives softly,
like footsteps on dust.
Imagine the kinds of words that sleep beneath the temple. A roll of hymns inked in careful lines meant to wake a god each morning with the right phrases, the right rhythm, the right names, because a misstep in language could feel like a misstep in reality. A set of ritual instructions: what to burn, what to pour, what to recite, what to conceal. The words are practical and sacred at once, like a map that only works when followed with reverence. A list of feast days, star-marked and counted, aligning the temple's pulse to the sky's long turning. A calendar is not merely scheduling in this world. It is a promise that the cosmos can be met on time with the correct offering. And there are other texts too, quietly administrative, quietly powerful: receipts, inventories, decisions, the records that keep a great institution alive in the world of grain and labor, land and obligation. In other ancient cultures, like Mesopotamia, temple archives of clay tablets preserve exactly this kind of temple life: economic records, letters, and other documents that show how sacred institutions were also practical centers of organization. So the archive beneath the temple is not just a closet, it is a mirror of the temple's full identity, heaven-facing and earth-bound. Whispers tell us that a temple's visible grandeur was only half of its power. The other half was procedural, written, repeatable, because a ritual must be remembered to be performed, a law must be preserved to be enforced, a lineage must be recorded to be believed, and a prayer, if it is to outlast its first speaker, must find a surface where time cannot easily wash it away. Here, in the cool room, that surface becomes sacred by association. Papyrus, leather rolls, clay tablets, different materials, same yearning, the desire to keep meaning from dissolving into air. Yet the chapter's true mystery is not what was stored, it is what was never opened again. Beneath the silence, you can feel the unanswered weight of it. A scribe may have copied a text with devotion, checked every line, sealed it with care, and placed it into a chest that would not be touched for 100 years. Another roll might have been consulted daily, until the edges softened and the fibers began to flake, then retired into darkness like an elder whose voice is still respected but no longer required. And then there are the texts no one planned to lose, texts that vanished because a roof collapsed, because damp crept in, because a political shift turned yesterday's sacred words into today's dangerous ones. In Egypt, scholars note that House of Life institutions are well attested in writing, but are not always easy to identify archaeologically, suggesting that much of this world of texts existed in spaces that do not always survive clearly in the ground.
So the archive becomes a meditation on absence as much as presence. Where memory fades, the room remains. The lamp's light shows a niche with nothing inside, a jar with a broken lid, a scrap of cord as if something was once tied here and then carried away and then forgotten. Dust settles into corners like a soft verdict. Time has already done some of its work. And still, hushed awe, not despair. Because even a lost library is evidence that someone believed knowledge deserved shelter.
In the Temple of Edfu, inscriptions describe an archive-like space and refer to chests of books and even large leather rolls listing temple literature, ritual texts, instructions, priestly lore, and administrative documents. Whether one imagines Edfu specifically or not, the idea is real. Temples could keep organized bodies of writing curated for worship and governance. Now the chapter deepens, as if the room itself is guiding you. Because the most haunting thought is not that knowledge was stored, the haunting thought is that knowledge was waiting to be read by someone who never arrived. A roll of words can be perfect and still become silent if the chain of readers breaks. A text can be expertly copied and still become useless if the ritual it supports is no longer practiced. A law can remain in ink while the society that obeyed it transforms into something unrecognizable. So you stand in the storeroom beneath the temple and feel a strange tenderness for the unread. Not pity exactly, something quieter, a recognition that the past was full of futures that did not happen. It is said that sacred secrecy is not always deliberate. Sometimes it is simply the result of survival's randomness. A chest stays sealed not because a priest forbade it, but because the key was lost. A niche remains untouched because the hallway collapsed. A scroll sleeps because the last person who could read its script died without passing the skill along. And yet the archive does not feel angry about this. It feels patient, like stone, like deep water, like a night sky that keeps its stars whether anyone looks up or not.
Marked by the moon, the temple above is a silhouette of columns and lintels. Beneath it, the archive is a second constellation, niches as dark squares, jars as rounded shadows, chords as thin lines, an architecture of memory rather than of spectacle. Beneath the silence, you start to notice the archive's ritual-like order. This shelf is for daily rites. That chest is for feast days. This niche is for accounts. That corner is for something that should not be spoken aloud. The system is invisible, but it hums with intention. Even the dust seems arranged by long habit. In Mesopotamia, surviving temple archives of tablets show how documents could accumulate into structured collections, letters, administrative lists, specialized texts, suggesting that the sacred and the bureaucratic were not enemies, but companions. So the archive beneath the temple becomes a forgotten heart, not because it is sentimental, but because it is functional in the deepest sense. It makes repetition possible. And repetition is how civilizations dream themselves into stability. Now the lamp is low, the flame shortens, the shadows lengthen, the room seems to expand as light withdraws, as if the darkness is not emptiness, but ownership returning. The last visible things are the closest ones, a chipped jar rim, a rough stone edge, a tied bundle whose fibers catch the light like pale hair. The rest becomes suggestion. This is where the chapter must end, not with revelation, but with sealing. The door closes again, the hinge sighs, the stairway waits, the lamp climbs away, step by step,
taking its small son back into the world of air and voices. Down here, nothing moves, scrolls sleep in darkness, and the mystery lingers, gentle and vast. How much knowledge was never read again? Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. So you leave the archive as you found it, cool, veiled, crumbled at the edges of time, and still quietly sovereign. Wisdom waiting patiently, like dust in a beam of light, like a name held in a sealed chest, like a temple's second heart, beating without sound.
It is said that the last page of a life is rarely announced. No trumpet, no ceremony, no loud closing of doors. Often it happens in lamplight, when the room is quiet enough to hear the oils settle in the bowl, and the night air presses gently against stone, and the world beyond the walls is already dreaming. Beneath the silence, an old writing table waits. Its surface is worn smooth in the places where forearms have rested for decades. There are shallow scratches where a reed was cut and recut. There are stains where black ink once pooled like a small dark river, and where red ink, used for headings, corrections, beginnings, left its faint clay-colored ghost. A wooden palette lies nearby, the kind that holds 2 inks and the reeds themselves, practical as a tool and reverent as an altar. And tonight, the reed is set down, not dropped, not tossed aside, placed carefully as though the table is a shrine and the pen is a final offering. Whispers tell us that in the old world, writing was more than information. It was a way of securing reality, binding names to stone, prayers to papyrus, numbers to grain, promises to time. The scribe's work could be administrative, sacred, or both, but it was never weightless. The ink had consequence. So when the hand finally rested, it was not simply fatigue, it was a threshold. The lamp's flame trembles in its dish, and the light gathers on the palette as if the wood itself remembers every day it traveled, carried under an arm, tied with string, wrapped with cloth, stored with care. Sets of scribal tools have been found together like this: palette, reed brushes, papyrus sheets, binding cords, and wrappings, as if the tools were a single body meant to stay intact. The old scribe sits without hurry. The room does not ask him to prove anything anymore. It only holds him. His breath moves slowly, and each breath is its own punctuation. The night outside is marked by the moon, softened by distance, and the temple roofs and courtyard stones keep their secrets without effort. If you listen closely, you can sense how a life measured in writing feels from the inside, not measured in birthdays, not in titles, not even in achievements, measured in lines.
Lines that begin with ritual phrases. Lines that list offerings. Lines that account for barley. Lines that copy a hymn so precisely that the hymn becomes a kind of ladder between the human tongue and the divine ear. Lines that preserve a name so it will not drift into the second death of forgetting. The hand has done this so long that it feels almost separate from the person, like a trained animal, like a disciplined flame. Day after day, year after year, the hand learned to make a world out of marks.
And now the hand is still. Where memory fades, that stillness becomes luminous. The scribe's tools speak for him. The palette with its two wells, black and red, suggests a life of order. Black for the body of text, red for emphasis, for headings, for corrections, a small system of meaning that guided readers long after the writer's breath moved on. The reed pen, too, is a quiet biography. A reed is cut from a plant that once grew by water. It is shaped, split, frayed, sometimes softened, made obedient to ink. It carries pigment in its hollow and releases it in controlled strokes. Even the tool has a lifespan, resharpened, worn down, replaced, until its short life becomes part of a longer practice. And that practice, over time, becomes a kind of vow, not spoken aloud, but lived. A vow to keep the signs consistent, a vow to keep the record legible, a vow to keep the chain unbroken. Copy, store, retrieve, copy again. In Egypt, cursive scripts like hieratic were well suited to ink and papyrus, writing that could move quickly enough for daily use while still carrying the authority of tradition. The reflection drifts gently through the rooms of a lifetime. Not in a straight line. More like smoke, more like a river seen at night. The scribe remembers without strain the first time he was trusted with a real sheet, the first time a teacher corrected him in red, the first time he realized that a single misplaced stroke could change a meaning, and that meaning could change a decision, and that decision could change a life. He remembers the sensation of copying texts that were older than his grandparents' grandparents, words already ancient when they entered his care. To hold such words is to live with a strange humility. You are not the source, only the vessel. And here is the tender contradiction at the center of the chapter. The scribe fades, the words remain. This is not a tragedy, it is the oldest arrangement. A human being is a brief weather system, breath, warmth, hunger, sleep. But a written record, when protected, can move across centuries like a sealed seed waiting for the right season. Objects in museums today, like scribal palettes and sets of brushes and papyrus sheets, make that continuity visible. The hand is gone, the work's footprint remains. Still, the chapter does not pretend this is easy. There is a quiet cost to being a vessel. A life spent bent over surfaces can feel like living at the edge of the world, always observing, recording, preserving, rarely being preserved oneself. The scribe's name may appear in small places, a label on a palette, a note in a colophon, a brief dedication, or it may not appear at all. And yet, even anonymity can be a form of devotion, to write so the world can remember itself without demanding the world remember you. Beneath the silence, the room grows softer. The lamp is lower now. Its light has the color of faded copper. Shadows gather in corners like folded cloth. The palette's wells are nearly dry. The reed pen's tip is dulled from years of contact with fiber. The scribe looks at the last page in front of him, not with urgency, but with recognition. Some people fear endings because endings feel like a door shutting, but this ending is more like a hand releasing something it has held for a long time, trusting the object will not fall. He does not need to finish one more line to prove he is worthy. Worthiness was never the point. The point was continuity. Somewhere nearby, in a chest or niche, lie older rolls, texts copied by other hands, other lives, other nights. Some were read daily, some were consulted once in a generation, some perhaps were never opened again, kept for the comfort of having them rather than the urgency of using them. It is said that knowledge is not only what is read, it is also what is preserved, waiting. Whispers tell us that a stored text is a sleeping voice. Now the final act arrives with almost no movement. The scribe's hand, which has traveled so far across so many surfaces, rests on the table for a moment, not to work, just to feel the wood, to feel the stillness, to feel the quiet truth that the body has carried its share. He inhales, he exhales. Breath slows. The lamp's flame makes a small sound, barely a sound at all, as if it too is tired.
And then, without a declaration, the old scribe leans back. The reed remains where it was placed. The palette remains open, its wells like small dark moons. The page remains marked. Outside, the sky continues its slow turning. Somewhere, water moves. Somewhere, dust shifts in a spiral through a crack of light and settles again. The closing silence is deep and calm, not empty, held. The listener is left with rest, knowing that long ago someone wrote so the world could remember itself and then quietly slept. Perhaps it was never meant to be louder than this. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And so the lamp burns lower. The reed pen pauses, as if it too has learned the language of rest. Somewhere, the city has already gone quiet. Courtyards empty, footsteps fade, doors settle into their frames. And in the hush, the written lines remain, still, patient, enduring in a way the human body never can. It is said that a scribe's life was measured in strokes, not seasons, in careful spacing, in steady hands, in the devotion of getting it right, again and again, so the world could remember itself. And when the work finally ends for the night, it does not end completely, because words have their own kind of wakefulness. Perhaps it was never meant to be loud. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. If sleep is close now, let it come. Let your thoughts loosen like sand slipping from a palm. You are safe here, in the dim corridors of the past, where memory moves slowly and nothing asks you to rush. Thank you for spending this quiet time with Twilight Tale. And when you're ready, tomorrow night or another night, there will be another door in the darkness, another lamp, and another ancient whisper waiting. Good night.